Good afternoon everyone, how yous all doing? Hope yous are well. Thank you very much for tuning in to my latest video. So today I want to talk about the conflict in Israel. I've obviously already done a video on that, but it would appear that we're getting ever closer to World War III. Now, if you're not in the know, you could be forgiven for thinking that it's at our doors. Fortunately, they need the population to consent to have their wars because they're not going to fight them. But something that caught my attention, I think it was last week I seen it, when there was an area that was controlled by the Israeli Defence Force, and they had sanctioned for a group of aid workers to go through Gaza and obviously provide things like food. I think it was like a type of soup kitchen or something like that. And the 3 vehicles that were going to be delivering this assistance were blown up, and I think 7 people died. Now, many people in Britain have been calling for an embargo of some kind onto Israel, a protest of some kind to stop buying goods and stop supplying them with weapons. I listen to people that have been saying this for 2 decades, but now it's becoming ever more obvious that the Israeli Defence Force is not a defence force, it's a terror organisation. Because as I'd mentioned in my Israel-Hamas video, yes, there's terrorists in Hamas, and I don't condone any strike at human life. But when you consider what terror groups like the Irgun and the Stern Gang, some of the crimes they committed back in the 1940s, if Palestine was to do that now, imagine what the governments of the world would say. Not only that, the Israeli Defence Force are still doing things like this, and it's only just now that people are starting to sort of open their eyes and say, well, hold on a minute here. Or if you listen to the news, that's what it would appear to be. Although I think there's many people can see Israel for what it is and have done for quite a long time. Because it's when you've got somebody like Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a criminal, he's a war criminal, and he needs to be locked up when all this is done. Even the Hamas leaders, are not defending them either. They don't live in Gaza, they live in Qatar. So their decisions, the things they're doing, it's not affecting them, it's not coming to their door. Which in my Israel-Hamas video I did question who their allegiance was to, because it's certainly not to the people of Palestine on the Gaza Strip. And I sort of looked into this a little bit, and I thought, so there's three vehicles that were carrying aid workers that were going to be delivering food, and they've been struck. The people have died, and I thought, right, what's the excuse they're going to give here? And then it wasn't long after that I realised that they were saying that they thought there was Hamas terrorists within these vehicles. So if you thought there was Hamas terrorists within the vehicles, why did you sanction the vehicles to go down the road that you controlled? Surely if you thought terrorists were in that, you wouldn't sanction them to drive down your road to get further closer to the population. You would have apprehended them there and then, before they'd even got onto the route. They didn't. They let them go on the route and then they blew them up. And then they've got the cheek to put out there to say, we're going to stop using AI to designate our targets. And it's like, well, you've been killing people long before AI came in. And if we were to flush it out, you'd be killing people long after if we don't start doing something about this. It's just absolutely unreal. They're saying it's a mistake. No, it wasn't a mistake, it was purposely done, because you don't want them carrying food and aid to the people in the Gaza Strip, because you're pure evil. I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu, honestly, I wouldn't trust him to look after a goldfish. And like I say, if it was up to me, he'd be going to jail for a very, very long time, and the key thrown away mid-Pacific with a breeze block attached to it. Because it's people like that are out there saying the way things need to be. We're defending our people. Right, okay. So what's your excuse for killing 8? Is that defence? Yes. Well, yes, it is, because we thought there was terrorists in there. Right, okay, I'll ask the question again. Why did you sanction them to go down that route if you thought they were terrorists? It's just been a trick, isn't it? I mean, let's be honest. It's absolutely horrifying for anyone watching on, and no wonder people are starting to wake up to it now, because they're starting to see the Israeli Defence Force for what it is. Now, I'd heard for a long time, and I used to watch this show called The Sopranos, and I remember hearing there was a line in that, and it basically said that they were talking about Jews and Christians, and they're saying they were friends, and the Holy Land was where peace would be. And there's one of the characters in it says, yes, you wait and see. And it always stuck with me. Like, so I was thinking, well, what do you mean wait and see? What's that got to do with it? And as time went on, I started to realise that, well, that's what they meant by that, the writers of that show meant, was they're obviously trying to trigger some kind of conflict from that part of the world. And I mean, switch the news on and let's see what's going on there, and you'll see that that's exactly what they're trying to do, coupled with the fact that they're obviously allowing there's mass immigration where it's at record levels, where people of Muslim beliefs or Islamic beliefs are being allowed to come into the country, and there's a divide being cast there between the white people of this country, or the natives of this country, or the non-Muslims of this country, who are basically frightened that Muslims are coming to take over. That's another video, but it's just to give you an idea that this is how they're stirring up the hatred. As I mentioned in a video before, in that care home in Ireland that they had to get pensioners out of it, but yet they've done it up for people who are seeking asylum. As I said before, it's one way to stir up hatred, and this letting Muslims in to run councils and all the rest of it is another part of it, which is why this idiot down in London, Sadiq Khan, has been allowed to run riot with this type of thing, because it's all been part of the agenda to stir up hatred in the natives. And unfortunately, World War III's always been in the plan for them. When I first started getting into this information, I came across a document. It was in a David Icke book, obviously, because that's really the only person I read in the beginning. And it was a document that was sent by a man by the name of Albert Pike to another individual who was probably one of his stooges, Giuseppe Mazzini. Now this document, it's got a plan in it for 3 world wars. Now when it surfaced, this document, it was about, I think it was 1958, and it was discovered by the son of a Canadian sailor. And at the time, we'd already had 2 world wars, so a lot of people were sceptical of its authenticity, because the way they described the 2 world wars was so accurate, and they thought, well, it has to be fake because they couldn't be that accurate. But when you look at what they said about the 3rd World War, there's just no way in 1958 you could have been that accurate. When you look at, you switch on your news channel, and you'll see that this document is being read out on the Daily News. And I've got the document here. I will go into it just in a second. But before I do that, I think it's probably important that we look into the background of people like Albert Pike and Giuseppe Mazzini. I'll start with Albert Pike. Albert Pike he's a Freemasonic god in America. He's a Southern District Grand Commander, or he was. The letter was sent in 1871, sorry. He was a Satanist. He was connected to Mazzini, as I've said. Now Mazzini, he's actually credited, he's the guy that started the mafia in Italy. Mazzini authorises fire, theft and prostitution, but it's in the Italian words, it's abbreviated with. It's why people say no mafia exists in America, because it technically doesn't, because Mazzini didn't authorise that in America, he authorised it in Italy. In America it's called La Cosa Nostra, so when people say there's no mafia in America, they're technically correct. But he also started the first central bank, and I'll come to why that was, that's enslaved everyone central banks are the reason we're all enslaved to this day, certainly in America. And Freemasonic bankers from London have got a lot to answer for as well, and they're part of this video too. Now, Albert Pike, he was around during the time of the Civil War in America, and he used Giuseppe Mazzini to go around and set up a number of groups that were anti-slavery, and it obviously stirred up something because it stirred up the war. And people would say, well, why would they want to get rid of slaves? It served them so well. Well, because they know that type of slavery's got a finite life. The type they've got now, or the type they're going for now, hasn't. It'll last forever. When people think they're not, when people think they're free, they don't rebel against not being free. But he went, because, like I say, his jurisdiction was in the south, and I've written it down because I didn't want to get it wrong. But he was from the, I think it was in Massachusetts. He was in. Yeah, South Carolina, sorry, and that was actually the first state that left the Confederacy, that left the Union to obviously start the war, to say that they wanted to keep slavery. Now, when they'd obviously withdrawn from that, it would have stirred up something. Of course it would, because they're pressing buttons as much, just like they're pressing buttons now with Iran attacking Israel for the first time. And Israel responding. I mean, does anybody actually believe that that's supposed to be a coincidence? No, it's not. But they've been pushing these buttons for a very, very long time. And as coincidence would have it, the mafia's got button men. That's what they're called, button men. And he was the head of an organisation, Albert Pike. It's called the Knights of the Golden Circle. And Jesse James, the famous outlaw, was part of that organisation. Well, it turns out that the same Freemasonic bankers that were funding Giuseppe Mazzini had offered to fund Abraham Lincoln, he was obviously against slavery as well. And the Freemasonic bankers that were funding Albert Pike as well. I mean, they fund both sides, it's how they do it. And the one stipulation was for Abraham Lincoln to get this funding was he was saying, look, you're going to have to agree to the first central bank in America, and he refused because he knew what it meant. And instead chose to opt to print what's known as greenbacks, which is interest-free currency for the government. John F. Kennedy, he did the same exactly 100 years later, and we all know what they've both got in common. Well, a lot of people say that it was obviously, or the official story says that it was John Wilkes Booth that was connected, that was the culprit for Abraham Lincoln's murder. But some people say it was actually Lincoln's opiate-addicted wife, which wouldn't surprise me. I haven't looked at any evidence regarding that, it's just what I've heard. But anyway, Abraham Lincoln was obviously murdered. And it turns out that it was Albert Pike's sort of fraternity that done this, and he was said that, I don't know if it was him that sanctioned it, I think it was someone called, it was Edward Stanton. No, it was Edward Stanton that he conducted the investigation into the death. It was Judah P. Benjamin that sanctioned the hit, and I think they used a bank in Montreal to fund it, something like $180,000 even then. But the Knights of the Golden Circle, after Lincoln was killed, Edward Stanton, who was another Freemasonic banker who was connected to them, he had set up the investigation. Well, he was also the guy that set up the roadblocks to trap John Wilkes Booth and blocked everybody on the road except the one he went down and letting him away. Well, it turns out that the Knights of the Golden Circle, which Albert Pike was the head of, was exposed in this conspiracy as well. Thus, Albert Pike had to change the name of this, Knights of the Golden Circle, and he changed it to the Ku Klux Klan, which is what it's still known today, which have terrorised black people all over America for a very, very long time. And they are Satanists. Albert Pike was a Satanist, they burn crosses. It doesn't get any more satanic than that. And then when you look at the name, I think that the name circle actually translates into Ku Klux. I think it's in Latin. So you can see where it's more or less the same thing. A couple of other people that were exposed, that were involved in this conspiracy, was someone called Lord Palmerston, who I think, if I'm not mistaken, was Prime Minister of England at the time. And he died, coincidentally, in the same year that all this transpired. And then you've got Giuseppe Mazzini, and I mentioned The Sopranos before. The Sopranos, there's actually a bit in The Sopranos where they're talking about famous Italians, and Giuseppe Mazzini is obviously one, and they're sitting talking, the daughter asks, who started the mafia? And he obviously gets offended, and then he starts talking about Giuseppe Mazzini as being the guy that installed the first central bank into America. But he was also the guy that started the mafia in Italy, so it's clever what David Chase done with that scene. I was really impressed with that once I understood what it meant. And like I say, the central banks, the Fed Reserve, that's what it is. It's a central bank, and it's enslaved the people of America to this bloody day. Lend money that doesn't exist and charge interest on it. It's not federal and it's not got any reserves. But these networks go back this long. And this letter, I'll read it out, this plan for this letter. So let's see if you recognise any of this. So you can get this yourself, just type in Albert Pike letter to Giuseppe Mazzini and you'll find the same PDF as I've got here. So it says here, the First World War must be brought in order to permit the Brotherhood. It says the Illuminati, but I say Brotherhood because they like to be called the Illuminati, and because they're eliminated, they're not eliminated in my opinion. To overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia and making that country a fortress of atheistic communism, which is exactly what it became. The divergences caused by the aging tour of the agents of the Brotherhood between the British and their Germanic empires will be used to ferment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used to destroy the other governments in order to weaken the religions, which brings us neatly into the sort of 20s and into the preempt to the Second World War. And it was the Red Revolution was actually funded by the Rothschilds. That's a provable fact. So why would the Rothschilds, who are bankers and capitalists, want to fund communism? For reasons that I've obviously explained in previous videos, to manipulate people and bring about their own outcome. The Second World War must be fermented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. Now, a lot of people, what they say is, it must be fake, it must be because that political Zionism didn't really exist back then. But when you're in the know and you're in the Brotherhood, you know where things are going, so you would use this language. The political Zionists are obviously, that's Israel. Fascists and the political Zionists. And it's what's weird is, the political Zionists on one level, which the Rothschilds actually funded Adolf Hitler. So did the Bank of England, so did Henry Ford, so did the Bush family. It's a very small world when we get to these families like. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed. Now, when I explained in a video before that they knew Nazism was never going to be, it was never going to take over the world. It was always created to be destroyed for so many different reasons, but one being, why would they destroy fascism or Nazism if they're Nazis? Because it's all about a mind of manipulation. So that Nazism destroyed and the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. Now, this was in 1871. The Balfour Declaration didn't come round till 1918, I think it was, when that was signed by Lord Rothschild in England. And yet, they were talking about that 40, 50 years before. That's why it's called the Great Work of Ages. Because and people say, well, why would they work so hard if they're not going to be part of it? Because they don't look at it the same way as we do. And it's the same with that. If you start a big company and you pass it on to your son and then you pass it on to your grandson, it's a similar type of thing. So a sovereign state in Palestine, that came after the Second World War. And it was actually Hitler that paid for the first Jewish occupants of Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would be then restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. So if you look at that, it's perfect, because the Second World War ended and then communism was obviously quite strong. It was built up. And then what came after it was the Cold War, right into the Cold War, just to start the next stage for this final social cataclysm, as they call it. Now, the Third World War must be fermented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the aging tour of the Brotherhood between the political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the State of Israel, mutually destroy each other. I'll read that again. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam and political Zionism mutually destroy each other. This was in 1871, this was written. And even if you take it from 1958, there's no way they could have known that in 1958 unless you were part of the inner circle and the know of the plan. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual and economical exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and one of the most bloody turmoil. And that's so that you'll be disillusioned with all these religions. There is no God. And then they can offer their new religion, their brotherhood religion. These are the people that's running our world. And yes, this was 1871. But look where we are. If Albert Pike was here now, he'd be proud. He would be proud. And what can we say for a man that started the bloody Ku Klux Klan or the Knights of the Golden Circle? Has anybody got any scepticism from what I've just read there? You switch on your telly and you see political Zionism and Islam will mutually destroy each other if we don't stop and do something about this. And it's another reason for the mass migrations into these countries. And I've often heard it said that the reason that Britain thwarted the Nazis during the Second World War was because of the community that they had. Everyone knew each other. There was your auntie, it was across the road, your gran's there. It was like that in a lot of streets. Even when I lived in New Mains, it was like that. It's not so much now. And it's because of the influx of immigration. It destabilises your community. Makes you weary of your neighbours. I'm not saying you should be, but that's why they've done it. I mean, look at people living down in Dover that, because there's a cargo of young men, they're living in fear for their lives. I'm not saying they should be in fear of these people, but the powers that be that are orchestrating this, they know that's how people are going to react to that kind of thing. It's all about fear. Fear is the currency of control. False evidence appearing real. I'm scared, I'm in fear, so that's why I need to do this. I mean, you watch things about the Second World War, and there was Jewish people walk about with stars on because they were afraid. They didn't want to, I better not, just in case they shoot me. But yet if everyone had said, no, we're not wearing this, they wouldn't be able to shoot everyone. And they would have tried, but they wouldn't have been able to. And it was remarkably like what happened with the masks a few years ago. Just wear it and shut up. Just wear it and shut up. You're causing problems for me. Well, it was no different, and there was a lot of similarities with what happened in Germany and Poland and the likes in the 1930s and what happened in the world in 2020, 21. It was the same tactics because it was the same networks that were orchestrating it. Because these tactics have worked so bloody well for them. I mean, this is nearly 200 years ago. 150 years ago nearly. I mean, that's 2 lifetimes for some of us sometimes. So they're well in advance, and the thing about it is, I mean, everyone says like about the 90s, we missed the 90s. The 90s were great, the 80s and everybody, they've all got their chosen decade, but what I find now is when I look back to the 90s in press conferences with pop stars or rock stars, whatever, it's the immature manner of the way everything was done, because we were so asleep. That's why it was probably so good, because we were all so ignorant to everything that was going on. And that would be fine if there was no one working behind the scenes to try and bring us into dystopia. But that's the point, that's what's happening, and we can no longer remain asleep. We've had our fun. And this letter just proves this. We're talking about a man that started the Ku Klux Klan, who was a Satanist and a Southern Grand Commander in Freemasonry, who's actually regarded as a Freemasonic deity by Scottish Rite members to this very day. Giuseppe Mazzini started the Mafia. Frankly, I would prefer the Mafia was in control, because at least you know where you stand with them, but even then they would still go to jail in my opinion, because they terrorise people, they run on fear. And these two people are swapping correspondence about them that's of events that are being read out on our bloody televisions at a time the letter was written and television didn't exist. And we're asked to believe that this is all coincidence with the buttons that are pressed with Iran. Iran has never attacked Israel in its history, never. But yet when you look at this, I mean, look at the project for the new American century. Go and read that document on the run up to 9/11. Everyone says 9/11 was done by guys in a cave. Go and read that document and you'll see evidence to the contrary. It talks about how 7 countries had to be regime changed in 5 years, using a series of theatre wars, and that's a quote from the document, theatre wars, because that's what they were, theatre. Crashing 2 planes in and then blame it into the World Trade Centre, and then blame it on somebody that's halfway across the world that's barely got an internet connection. Yeah, okay. And then you look at the evidence to that, it was obviously an inside job. But they regime changed 5 countries or 7 countries in 5 years, and you can go back with hindsight and tick them off. Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, Iraq, North Korea was on there. I'm sure it was on there. Obviously, you're seeing that on the news all the time. China was probably one as well. But you can see that they've ticked off these bloody countries. The amount of people that tell me, that laugh at me and say, oh, you say 9/11 was an inside job. And I'll say, well, what do you know about the project for the new American century? And they look at you blank. Like they don't know what to say to you because they've never heard of it, and they actually feel a bit embarrassed, and they should be. Because anyone that claims they know what happened in 9/11 and yet they've never read that document, I'm sorry, but you don't. And this is why we need to get informed with things like this. I mean, I've said it many times, don't take my word for it. Please, 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 go and look at this stuff. And actually the Chase Manhattan Bank, just seen a note there, just when I say this, the Chase Manhattan Bank, like, Salmon Chase, he was the Secretary of State at the time. He was so helpful with the cover-up and the conspiracy with regards to Abraham Lincoln's death that they actually named a bank after him. It's called Chase Manhattan. So there's sides of history that we are not told, everyone. Now, I can't, and no one else can do it for you either. Say this to my family members all the time. We need to start learning about this stuff and learn how these puppeteers work and how they pull the strings. Because when you look at the mafia is just another one of their secret societies. Like, secret societies run this planet. There's no doubt about it. This is evidence of that. And how can a man who started an organisation like the Ku Klux Klan be still regarded as a Freemasonic deity or a Freemasonic god? How can that be? I don't get that. I don't understand that. And then you look at the tit for tat with Israel and Iran. How is that anything else but trying to get the political Zionists and the world of Islam to destroy each other? I don't think you need to look any further than that now. And it does become actually, if it wasn't so tragic, it would be hilarious at how obvious this is once you're aware of this information. And I think it's time that we see Israel for what it is, a terrorist government. And that doesn't mean to say that every single person that works within that government that believe that should be happening. It doesn't mean that I believe Jewish people are terrorists, because I don't. The vast majority of Jewish people want nothing to do with them. And no wonder. It's why we need to come together with all these people. Because the government entity is different from the local entity. We have to remember that. It's always different. Yes, there's people from the local entity that move into it and they sell us out. Of course there is. That's what happens. Or they get vibrated into line. Entrainment, as it's called. Happens all the time. But we need to get our grips. We need to get our heads in the game, people. Because there's a game being played. I say it nearly every video. And if we don't play it, it'll play us. Thank you very much for watching. I do apologise about the lack of lives recently. I don't know what it is, I've not got a... It seems like somebody asked me what the title was the other week there, and I kind of panicked, I didn't have one. I thought, I'm not even got any titles, so I don't know what to talk about, and it could be kind of embarrassing, but I'll try and get one in the go as quickly as I can. But thank you for your continued support, and anyone that continues to like and share and subscribe. Yous are all very much appreciated, and I'll see you on the next one, okay? Thank you.